The treat yourself approach to spending money is also very real. Not something that's traditionally rooted in, rational economic or rational finance. My name is George Saradakis. I am an associate at First Financial Services, and today we're going to dive a little bit into the psychology behind budgeting. We're not going to talk so much about numbers. We're going to talk about why it is budgets often fail. Now, I'm going to ask you, how many times have we started a budget or started making a budget, and then maybe 3-4 weeks have gone by and it's kind of just fallen by the wayside? And that's the question that we're going to focus on today. We're going to focus on reframing budgets. We're going to focus on the psychology behind it. And when it comes to budgeting, it's a lot less about willpower than we may think it actually is, and more about the identity behind it, our feelings of it, and how we can actually manipulate our budget to work for us as opposed to us conforming to a spreadsheet. What often happens is financial advisors and planners and professionals tend to think of people as rational actors. It's classic economic theory where we assume everybody's rational. But if we take a behavioral finance approach to it, cognitive psychology approach to it, we understand that not everybody's rational. Nobody's rational. Everyone has flaws. Everyone has biases. Modern day planners are trying to apply cognitive psychology and behavioral finance to financial planning and working with clients when it comes to working their budgets. It's more often than not that people tend to make financial decisions based on their identity and who they are, as opposed to what they think is the right thing to do. For instance, if we have someone who is looking for a car, conventional wisdom would say just buy the car outright. The next common approach would be to finance the car. That tends to not always be the case. We have people that obviously lease cars. Why? Well, because they like the idea of going to the dealership and getting their car serviced and being under warranty. They like the idea of changing cars every 3 years. They also understand that in a time like now, a lot of people have remote work. They don't necessarily drive to the office all the time, so they don't run up their miles. So they're keeping lower car payments and understanding that because they don't drive to the office every day and they work from home, that's sometimes the best option for them. That is a huge step away from conventional economic wisdom, where they want to maximize every dollar. The traditional approach would say buy the car outright. So that could be a $2,000 car, that can be a $20,000 car. The idea there is that we want to not pay interest on any car and have the money instead work for us in an investment account. Again, that tends to be the more economic traditional approach, not necessarily what is best for the client today. A lot of people, when it comes to budgeting or when it comes to their own money story, is that they're not necessarily good with money or money stressful to them. Maybe it was something more traumatic from when they grew up that, kind of stains their relationship with money. They also see as spending money as rewarding. Maybe they had a hard week at work. Maybe they had a hard year, and spending money is their release. Maybe they go on a trip, or maybe they go buy a new suit, or maybe they go to the spa. Whatever that may be, the treat yourself approach to spending money is also very real, and it's not something that's traditionally rooted in, rational economic or rational finance. All of that being said, when it comes to overspending or budgeting, spreadsheets aren't necessarily always the right answer. We want to work with spreadsheets to identify what our common tendencies and what our common spendings are, like, for instance, our rent or our utilities or car payments, insurance, etc. But when it comes to more behaviorally based spending approaches, conventional wisdom sometimes takes a backseat to that. And we want to be able to reframe our relationship with money and understand that it was built by our environment and our relationship with money, not so much what a spreadsheet says. And I relate a lot to that. Working on my own financial plan and working on my own cash flow, I tend to spend money a lot differently than my peers. A lot of my peers tend to go out to breweries, or they tend to go out to wineries, or they have a lot of spending that revolves around alcohol. I personally don't drink, and so my spending tends to be around food, or it tends to be around travel. Understanding how each of us spends money differently really helps us to identify a core behavioral spending pattern and adjust our budgets accordingly. However, because of the psychology and because of a relationship with money, which my identity is rooted in, it is hard for me to spend money sometimes. It's sometimes the I deserve it, or, I can splurge on this, doesn't always hit right away. On the flip side of the coin, you also have impulsive spending. I could spend money impulsively as well. So there's a weird dynamic that isn't necessarily calculated or captured in traditional rational economics. It's something that can only be explained through the irrationality of human behavior. I share this because I want to illustrate that a lot of you have a version something like my story. I want to illustrate that the pattern is universal, and even though I'm in the industry, it's still common for everybody to have some kind of irrational behavior when it comes to spending their money. The other thing is, once we see that behavior in ourselves, it becomes a lot easier for us to shape our budgets. This way we can fit our lifestyle, within reason, of course. Now, one of the more common budgeting patterns isn't necessarily overspending. It's what's called avoidance tendencies. Avoidance could look like not checking our bank account after a weekend of going out or vacation, not opening our credit card statement after a rough month, or maybe the I'll deal with it later, only for later to never come. A lot of these things are avoiding a reality where we may have overspent a little bit every month in the past week or month. And that tends to happen because financial anxiety triggers the same brain response as pain or trauma or a physical threat. Avoidance tends to also be a protection mechanism. However, problem with that is that it tends to make things worse. The reason is because as we experience anxiety, that tends to lead to avoidance, which tends to lead to more anxiety, which tends to lead to more avoidance, and the cycle just continues to repeat itself. How we could break the cycle is by doing a weekly check-in for 10 minutes with ourselves and our finances, completely judgment-free, so we can remove the dread and we can identify areas that we're spending and maybe could cut back for next month or the next week. We'd want to reframe the act. And again, branching off of that, we're able to identify areas where we tend to spend more, and maybe we reshape it and reframe it, and maybe we pull back a little bit on that from last week's. This way, we can evenly spread that spending category over the course of the month or the next couple of weeks. We also want to remove our judgment. People tend to be a little too hard on themselves, and last month's spending isn't necessarily the end-all be-all. We're going to continue to make more money, but we need to make sure that we're not repeating the actions and that we're able to move forward constructively by using the information that we just gathered from last month's spending. So there's this concept called the budget guilt cycle, where essentially, and we're going to put an illustration here, the budget guilt cycle starts where we have budgeting, moves on to slipping, which means that we tend to let the budget and cash flow slip a little bit, which then leads to guilt, and then leads to avoidance, which is that behavior that we just referenced, which is we don't look at our checking account, we don't look at our credit card statements, etc., which tends to lead to more overspending, where because we're not checking how much we have in our bank account, we're just spending more than we may actually have. That tends to lead to more guilt and then an abandonment of budget itself. That's not something that we necessarily want to fall into, because that can quickly become a spiraling cycle. The budget itself is not a moral document, it's more a guideline. And going over it for a week isn't necessarily a failure, it's information about how we spend. The goal of a budget isn't perfection, it's awareness and consistency, and it allows us the opportunity to understand more about our spending habits. And again, We want to be able to spend our money. We work for it. We work very hard for it. But we also have to understand that we have bills, we have rent, we have maybe we have children that need, something. We have dogs, we have pets, we have all this other stuff. We have to be able to meet those obligations as well. So, spending our money isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's how it fits into the broader overall financial picture and the broader financial cash flow. So, how can we reframe the budget so we can break the cycle? Well, we want to make sure that we're stop thinking as the budget as a set of hard, fast rules for us to follow or break. We have to start thinking of it as a system that allows us to prioritize different areas of our lives. We also want to make sure that we understand that consistent spending in one category isn't necessarily a flaw. It's showing us how we actually like to spend our money. Again, I'm going to use myself as an example. I like to go out to eat. So if I spend $300 a month in restaurants, that's not necessarily me overspending that if it's my only hobby or if it's the one thing I like to do. Let's say I don't like to ski in the winter, so I'm not going to be spending a lot of money skiing or maybe golfing in the summer. My hobbies tend to be more going to the gym or going to different restaurants or traveling. Those are going to be more the areas where I'd want to spend my money. So in that case, I'm not overspending unless I'm going and drawing my checking account into a deficiency. The last thing is that we want to create a budget that we can actually stick to. So again, making sure that we're meeting obligations like rent, meeting obligations like car loans or insurance and children's school and their hobbies and their activities. We want to be able to meet all those obligations, and then anything outside of that are money that we can spend on our own hobbies, on our own shopping and our own things to make sure that we bring ourselves sanity as well. So what does this broader behavioral budget actually look like? Well, we want to start with values. We want to start with values, not categories. So we actually would want to write down 3 or 4 things that we'd like to spend money on guilt-free. Maybe it's travel. Maybe it's restaurant hopping. Maybe it's bar hopping. Maybe it's whatever it may be. Skiing, maybe golfing, or I like to go try new gyms once a month. Whatever that may be, we want to write those 3 or 4 things down. Those are things that are protected. They're non-negotiables. Those are things that are true to our lifestyle and who we are. And then finally, the budget will build around those as well as our other obligations. Now, when we build these into our budget, these are intentional categories. We're not depriving ourselves of things that we like. We're intentionally putting them in there and including them so we can continue to bring ourselves some kind of peace and sanity while we're meeting other obligations and other categories in our cash flow. One healthy practice to start adopting as well would be to build ourselves some kind of a fudge factor, whether that's 5% or 10% on a monthly basis. We want to be able to make sure that whatever it is that we think that we're going to spend in a certain category, we're giving ourselves a little bit of a cushion there. Maybe we like to compete in high rocks and we have to travel, so we have to build that travel budget in. No buffer for these categories makes us feel like we're being a little too strict on ourselves, and one slip could lead to that budget spiral that we were just discussing. The third item is automating non-negotiables. Stepping away from our spending for a moment, this would be things like savings into an emergency fund, investing into our 401k or other after-tax accounts, debt payments, putting our car loan on auto pay, putting our rent on auto pay, credit cards on auto pay. Having these things come out on a monthly basis automatically takes the thought out of it, and we're not left staring at a checking account with $400 and trying to figure out how we're going to pay rent at the end of the month because we felt like we overspent in certain categories. This would definitely help to provide that behavioral buffer as well, where we're forced to not overspend because we also had rent come out this month automatically. And then finally, we want to review on a weekly basis what our spending is, and then also make those adjustments monthly. So for me, summertime tends to be a chunk of a few months where I tend to spend a lot more money. You go to the beach, then you go to the boardwalk for lunch, and then you come home, shower, and then I go out for dinner. And just right there, is a lot more spending that I do in 24 hours compared to what I do in a regular winter weekend. Adjusting my cash flow on a monthly basis will help me understand, okay, summer's coming up. I tend to spend a lot more in the summer. I need to have X amount of dollars put away so I can spend comfortably over the next couple of weekends. And that's a big deal because now I've pre-prepared for next couple of months, made the adjustments accordingly in April, which means I'm not going to necessarily be overspending or running up credit card debt in June, July, August, September. And so to wrap all of this up, what does all of this mean? Well, not sticking to a budget doesn't necessarily mean we can't do it. It means that we have to understand how we can make our budget work for us. It means that the approach that we built to this point wasn't friendly for us, and it's not built for how we actually behave and how we actually spend our money. The behavior gets a lot easier once we understand ourselves and we're intentional about how we construct our budget to fit our lifestyle. Doing a weekly check-in for 10 or 15 minutes could definitely help us identify patterns in our spending and make any kind of adjustments accordingly if we feel like we're overspending in a certain category. And then we want to ask ourselves, am I spending in such a way that actually reflects my values or reflects my lifestyle? This is going to help us to maybe eliminate certain categories, add in certain categories, more fun categories, and have more guilt-free spending because, maybe donating to a charity is something that I actually value, or donating to my local church is something I actually value. So I don't necessarily need to spend in these categories because I want to spend more here. With all of that being said, I hope this all helps. If it does, please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you feel like this would help somebody else, please feel free to share it with them as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.